Hi, I'm Steve Gedeon, a professor at one of the largest entrepreneurship programs in the world at the Ted Rogers School of Management at Ryerson University in Toronto, Canada. But today I'm coming from Agrigento, I Valli dei Templi, the Valley of the Temples. This is one of the most prosperous Greek colonies in Magna Grecia, in what is now known as Sicily in Italy. Plato once famously said, upon seeing the living standards of the inhabitants of I Valli dei Templi or Agrigento, he remarked that people here build like they're going to live forever, but they eat like they're going to die tomorrow. This is how people love their life. In ECLD module number 11, I talked about the principle of integrity, the principle of being principled. I talked about this idea of living without wax, living without contradictions in your life. To thine own self be true. That the path to happiness is through being in harmony between your beliefs, your values, your attitudes, your goals, and your actions. And that you're in harmony between what you think, what you feel, what you say, and what you do. And so, as part of that, I talked about being aware of various sources of unhappiness or sources of contradictions and wax. The first of these sources of contradictions in your day-to-day life is emotional reactions to events outside of our control. That things shouldn't make you unhappy or things shouldn't make you act inappropriately, that you should be in control of yourself. And that very often what happens is something happens and you immediately react inappropriately and you want to change this behavior. That instead of being water off a duck or water off a loon, that things get under your skin or that you don't react in the way that you'd like to. Another one is emotional reaction to things that are inside of our control. Things are going well for you. Things are going kind of according to plan, but you're still not as happy as you want to be. We talked about making sure that you're proud of your accomplishments, that you take time to celebrate the positive, that you reframe the negative using anti-fragility tools, and that you're building better habits to make sure that you've set goals, but maybe you don't take action towards them, and you just need to fix some of your habits so that you habituate being proactive and acting towards your goals. We then also talked about your long-term happiness, that the slope of your happiness curve should be going up over time, that there's these deeper sources of unhappiness or contradictions that affect your long-term happiness, and that this requires a conscious effort and growth to eliminate these contradictions between your values, your beliefs, your goals, and your actions. That, as we showed, that if you're in harmony, that if your beliefs and attitudes are all in line with what you do and you say and you feel, that your emotional feedback should be happiness. That you don't have these contradictions, you're living without wax, that you have integrity, both subconsciously and consciously. Now, many of us may have conscious beliefs or things that we think about, such as conscious beliefs about the world and technology and people or politics, and what your consciously held religious beliefs might be, or what your consciously held attitudes and values are, like your interests or objects that you love or lifestyle that you're trying to achieve or people that you want to be around with and preferences that you have and the goals that you set. But your conscious beliefs also affect your subconscious beliefs. That your religious beliefs, for example, might affect your subconsciously held self-esteem or your internal versus external locus of control or what you view as the norms around you. That your consciously held beliefs affect your subconsciously held beliefs. And so these automated reactions to events are driven by your subconscious beliefs, not so much your conscious beliefs. And this is true of your attitudes and values as well, too, that your conscious beliefs affect your subconscious belief in your own self-efficacy or your perceived behavioral control or your adaptability, agility, curiosity, grit, resiliency, and tenacity, and things like that. But if what you think is in harmony with what you do, this harmony causes happiness, that your emotional feedback to being in harmony should be happiness. And what we talked about is if you're struggling to take action based on your goals, you fix this through your habits, so that when you set a goal, that you habituate taking action towards them. But if some of the issues might be beliefs or attitudes, the best way to deal with this is through self-talk, or also known as Cognitive Behaviour Therapy, Mindfulness, or Neuro-Linguistic programming. So ECLD Tool number 9 was around goal setting. This is number 10 around self-talk. Now, You've been journaling around your happiness ever since tool number 2. So you should have lots of data now on what your self-talk is, the things that create happiness, the things that kind of bug you, the things that get under your skin. So you should have lots of data to work with by now that we're in tool number 10. So there's self-talk for all 3 different kinds of happiness, not just the day-to-day, but also this long-term sources of possible contradiction or unhappiness. Now, cognitive behavioral therapy says things don't make us unhappy, that there's this chain reaction they call the ABCs, that there's the activating event, the thing outside of your control, but your emotional reaction or the consequences or the emotional consequences don't happen automatically, that they're moderated by your beliefs. I can give you an example. So imagine you hear a bump in the night and that's the activating event. There's a noise in the middle of the night. But your emotional reaction will vary depending on what your beliefs are. So for example, if your belief is, oh my gosh, that's an intruder, then your emotional reaction will probably be fear. Whereas if your belief is, oh, that's my roommate again, and he's probably coming home late at night and forgot his key again, then maybe your emotional reaction would be annoyance, for example. Or maybe your belief is, oh, that's my romantic partner coming to visit me in the middle of the night, and your emotional reaction is one of excitement or happiness or passion or something like that. So things don't make you happy or unhappy. It's your beliefs that moderate the difference between the activating event and what the emotional consequences are. Now, cognitive behavioral therapy tends to focus on the negative, but you can also use this same structure around self-talk statements, even for beliefs that aren't necessarily negative, that you just want to tweak what some of your belief systems might be. And so there's 3 primary beliefs they call the cognitive triad in cognitive behavioral therapy. It's your view of yourself, your view of the world around you, and your view of the future. Do you have a positive view of yourself and the world and other people, or do you have a negative view of yourself and the world around you, or a negative view of what the future is going to believe? And so if you do have these dysfunctional negative beliefs about yourself or the world or the future, you can change these through cognitive behavioral therapy or positive self-talk or mindfulness. Now, CBT talks about a couple of very specific negative beliefs that cause cognitive distortions. The first one is arbitrary inference, that something happens and you draw an inappropriate inference from this. So this could be on the basis of insufficient or irrelevant evidence. For example, oh, I'm worthless because an open-air concert has been rained out. Well, most people might think this is kind of like, why would you think that? But this is one of the more common causes of unhappiness, that this thing happens, this is your emotional consequence, and the 2 things don't really map together. So you have to find a way to kind of get some intellectual space or emotional distance between the event and your reaction, and kind of say, let me think about that before I choose to have an emotional response, before I just kind of sort of subconsciously automatically have an emotional reaction. Another one is selective abstraction, that you focus on a single aspect of the situation and ignore others. An example from this website is, you feel responsible for your team losing a football match, even though you're just one of the players on the field. Or if it's the case of U.S. football as opposed to soccer, you're probably only one of 22 players on the field. The game probably wasn't lost just because of you. Another one is magnification, that you exaggerate the importance of things. That, you get a bad grade and this is the end of the world for me. Or, somebody breaks up with you and you exaggerate the importance of that. Or somebody doesn't return your phone call or your text message fast enough and you exaggerate, oh, they hate me or they're mad at me or something like that. Or, in this example is you scrape a bit of paint off of your car and you see yourself as an awful driver. Another one is, instead of magnifying things, you minimize things. Very often you're minimizing good things. So, you get praised by your teacher or supervisor at work and you kind of minimize that, or you see that as trivial and you exaggerate the negative things and you minimize the good things. Another one is overgeneralization. Just because you got a D on an exam doesn't mean that you're stupid. Maybe it just means you didn't study hard enough, or maybe you have to study a little harder than. Another one that CBT therapists talk about a lot is this personalization, that you attribute everything that happens around you to somehow it has a meaning to you. that your teacher looks unhappy, it must be my fault. My parents are fighting, it must be my fault. A student drops my class, the student must hate me. Whereas in reality, very often students drop a class for things that have absolutely nothing to do with the professor. They don't even know the professor's name. They drop the class for completely different reasons. The professor is mad for completely different reasons. Your parents are fighting for something that has nothing to do with you. So you don't have to personalize things. This is an example of some of the negative beliefs that come out of cognitive behavioral therapy. So when you're forming your own self-talk statements, they should use personal pronouns, I or me, present tense, short and concise, positive goal seeking rather than avoiding negatives. And again, this kicks in positive value driven systems of motivation rather than negative avoidance systems. Non-competitive rather than comparing with others, strive for improvement, not perfection. And finally, this isn't meant for self-flattery or self-aggrandizement, or I call it self-puffery. This isn't meant to say, oh, I'm amazing or I'm wonderful. You're trying to fix things that maybe you're not amazing around. And so this isn't about saying things just to make yourself feel better or lying to yourself and saying I'm amazing even when you're not. So you want to keep it real, but focus on here's what I'm doing to improve. You want to make sure you kick in your positive motivational system by striving for a positive and acting towards a positive rather than running away from a snake, for example. You always want to put things in the positive rather than avoiding the negative. Here's some example of positive self-talk statements from a website. I feed my spirit daily, or I'm in charge of how I feel today, or I will choose happiness and gratitude today. So this is clearly changing your focus on things. Another one is I show love for myself and others daily in all that I do. This shows that I'm treating myself well and I'm trying to change how I feel about myself. Or I'm kind to myself and other people. Now you notice that these different statements are directed towards different aspects of happiness. Sometimes they're directed towards changing your emotional reactions to things. Sometimes they're directed towards changing your focus. Sometimes they're directed towards changing your belief system. And so here's some examples from my self-talk statements. So here's an example for things outside of my control. I maintain a positive attitude and even keel in all I say and do. Now, I don't always, but what I'm saying is I'm striving towards becoming better at maintaining a positive attitude. And I created this statement because sometimes things would make me angry and I didn't like that negative emotional response to things. And so this is kind of reprogramming my belief system and my subconscious so that my automated responses are water off a duck or water off a loon rather than, oh, some terrible thing happened, I'm going to be mad. I'm a sailor, so I like to use this one. I cannot change the wind, but I can adjust the sails. I used to have a self-talk statement saying, I don't swear. It didn't work very well for me, partially because it's avoidance of a negative. I eventually changed that one to, I carefully choose my words and thoughts. So rather than saying, I don't swear, maybe I still swear because I choose to swear because I'm trying to make a point, but I try not to just accidentally swear because I've lost control of my emotional response. Less is more. I say less than necessary. Sometimes I tend to go on a little bit, and I'm trying to work on that one. That doesn't mean that I always say less than necessary. It kind of means I'm trying to say less than necessary. Here's some examples of self-talk statements for things that are inside of my control. One is I take my role as a professor very seriously. I turn off the noise and I focus on the person I'm speaking with. I go to a lot of meetings and very often the person I'm talking with is distracted. They're looking at their phone, they're checking their watch, they're looking at their computer, they answer the phone. I don't like the way this makes me feel. I never want to make my students feel that way when they come into my office. So sometimes I have to remind myself to turn off that inner dialogue and focus on the person I'm speaking with. It's a very powerful way to build rapport and long-term relationships with people that they know I care about you. I'm interested in what you're saying and nothing else is going on in my life beyond our interaction right now in the here and now. It takes a lot of practice and self-talk to get this to happen, and I'm continuously trying to get better at this. I am inspiring is a positive self-talk statement. Again, it doesn't mean, oh, look at me, I'm amazing, I'm always inspiring. What it means is I'm striving to focus on spending more time ensuring that I say inspiring things rather than criticizing things that other people are doing. And so even though I use radical candor, I'm trying to be more sensitive in my application of radical candor. That maybe I ask permission before being completely honest with people. Or maybe I couch it in a little different ways. Or sometimes I use the sandwich approach. Say something nice, maybe say something they don't want to hear, and then reinforce the positive thing again. And so you want to keep these statements short, but very often there's a couple of paragraphs of thinking that goes into each and every one of these. These didn't just come in a vacuum, and my self-talk statements should not be your self-talk statements. That there's things I'm working on in my own habits and my own emotional responses that I'm trying to make better about myself. And these are statements that are short, concise, present tense, that are trying to help me remind myself I want to try to be more inspiring. And sometimes that's short and I just say, I'm inspiring. Here's some examples of some refocusing and habit formation. So for example, I do meaningful work. It doesn't mean everything I do is meaningful, but what it means is I try to spend more time focusing on things that are meaningful. I try to say no to more things that aren't meaningful. And when I do have to do things I don't want to do, I try to find a way to make it into something meaningful. But I'd shorten that into I do meaningful work. I get really focused on things when I'm working on a computer. I have to remind myself to stretch and take back exercises and things like that. So this is kind of one of these habit formation things. I take frequent back breaks and stretch every day, or I reflect on how I did every day. Here's some examples of some reprogramming of my belief systems. I've mentioned before, I was raised a Catholic. I went to Catholic school for 13 years. I think that makes me kind of a subject matter expert on Catholicism. I don't like a lot of what my early childhood education gave me in terms of my belief of the world and the people in it and of myself. That, I was born with original sin. I've been cast out from the Garden of Eden. This world is meant to be pain and suffering because we acted badly, and after I'm dead, I'll be able to go back to paradise and live in heaven, and I won't be happy here. Happiness is only beyond the grave. Happiness is not meant for life on earth. Happiness is meant for beyond the grave. I didn't want to have this belief, but I didn't know what belief system to replace this with, and so I wanted to study and understand my philosophy. I want to spend time reading to understand the world around me and to explore different belief systems and find pieces of good things in different religious beliefs and avoid the negative aspects of some things. And I'm using some of these things to focus on positive things, to be value intoxicated, and to believe that this is a wonderful world that we're in, rather than a veil of tears and suffering that needs to be passed through before we can find happiness after we're dead. So these are all things that I say to myself to reinforce my positive notion and belief that I'm a good person, and that I'm striving to achieve moral perfection. I'm trying to become a good person, but also I'm striving to believe that this is a wonderful world that we live in. So I've identified 5 possible sources of long-term contradictions and unhappiness. Now, most people won't have all 5 of these. Some people might not have any of these things, but these are just common sources of contradictions that I've seen in myself or my students and my friends and people that I know or that therapists have pointed out. One is family. Family can be a tremendous source of love and support and happiness and belonging and strength, but families can also be problematical. Families can give you unrealistic expectations or unchosen obligations and fighting. There's a lot of aspects of a family that might not be all wonderful. And so you have to find ways to find the good aspects of your family and avoid the negative consequences of maybe some of the things that aren't working so well. Maybe you're lucky and got born into a fabulous family that's wonderful in all things. Most people have some positives and negatives in their family, and they've got to kind of sort of figure out how to become happy from the good parts and to avoid the unhappiness from the bad parts. Another one I've identified is this idea of altruism. So altruism does not mean be nice to other people. Altruism is a philosophy that says it is your duty to serve other people. That's your obligation is to serve other people, that you are your brother's keeper, and you can't be happy while other people are suffering. You must devote your life to service towards others. And the alternative philosophy would be the philosophy of self-interest or rational egoism that says I have a rational interest in my own happiness, but I may choose to help other people. And I, for example, do not accept altruism. It's not my duty to help other people, but I love helping other people. I love being involved in Enactus and the Future Food Institute and the Business Innovation Hub. I jumped in to help companies that were suffering from COVID-19. I'm active in helping the indigenous community and marginalized youth and trying to make the world a better place and trying to make food more accessible and reduce food insecurity and things like this. But these are obligations that I've chosen because they make my life happiness and I want to make the world a better place. This isn't a moral obligation that I have to serve other people because they're somehow more important to me. And so I don't have guilt or I choose not to have a belief in failure to live up to these ideals. And an example I used in the last ECLD number 11 was that a lot of people have Mother Teresa as a role model, that they say, I should be like Mother Teresa, but I'm not like Mother Teresa. And this is a source of guilt and unhappiness. Religious beliefs can be a source of security and confidence and strengths. A lot of my students have deeply held spiritual beliefs that are a really source of strength and hopefulness for them. Other religious beliefs sometimes aren't so positive, that many organized religions have a belief that humanity is wicked. We were outcast from the Garden of Eden, and this is a vale of tears that we have to suffer through before we find happiness in the afterlife. And this is a source of a lack of self-esteem. I've had quite a number of my LGBTQ plus students that have deep-seated sources of happiness because their religion says, there's a problem with your homosexuality. You're a bad person because of this. And so there's this conflict between their religious beliefs and who they are as a human being. Determinism is another source that I've seen in a lot of students, that this belief in fate or destiny or astrology or the system makes some people feel that they're helpless victims or they're powerless or that people are out to get them or that nothing matters. And this is a source of external locus of control, and so they don't devote time and effort and motivation to their own life and their own happiness because, well, it just doesn't matter, or I'm helpless anyway and it doesn't matter. The last one I'd like to talk about is this idea that money is the root of all evil, especially for a lot of my business students. They want to start up a business, so they are part of the capitalistic system of prosperity and build great products and services that people love and pay money for and are profitable, but they have this sense of guilt that money is the root of all evil and that making money is somehow bad and morally inappropriate. And so instead of being the virtue of pride, they view pride as one of the 7 deadly sins. And I pointed out this idea of the mind-body dichotomy or the moral-practical dichotomy, that it's practical to make money, but it's immoral to make money. It's practical to be happy and to look out for my own interests, but it's immoral to look out for your own interests. It's practical to love my own children, but morality demands that I love my neighbor as myself. And so there's this tension, there's this contradiction between what their conscious belief system is, or what their subconscious beliefs are related to self-esteem and internal locus of control, versus what's practical and how most people live their lives. And so again, they say one thing, they do something else, and this is a source of tension and unhappiness in their lives. So why create self-talk statements? Well, the first reason is to just exert agency over your life, to have your hand on the steering wheel of your life, to program your own computer. That up until you became an adult, other people basically programmed your computer for you. Other people gave you a belief system. Other people made you feel the way you feel about yourself. And other people kind of gave you your worldview and your view of yourself and your view of the future. And now you want to exert agency, adult control over saying, I'm going to choose my belief system rather than just believe whatever hodgepodge of thoughts were put in there by other people. Another reason is to remind yourself of the things that you like about yourself. that you want to continue to do the things that you're good at. If you're honest and keep commitments and you're conscientious and you have certain good habits, this is a great way to continue to do that through positive self-talk, to reinforce the good things, but also to change the things that you want to change, or maybe to understand things that you want to understand related to your belief system or your changing habits. So certainly if you're trying to change your habits or reprogram your emotional responses to things, then you really need cognitive behavioral therapy or mindfulness or positive self-talk statements. And again, I'm kind of bundling all of these different therapeutic ideas into one kind of general idea of positive self-talk. That if you're trying to change things that you don't like or responses that you're not happy with, that this is the path towards doing that. But for me at least, I often just want to change my focus, that I want to kick in my positive, value-driven happiness system rather than avoiding the negative of the snake. And so just changing your focus away from the negative and towards the positive is another reason for positive self-talk statements. And finally, these things should be happiness generating. They shouldn't be self-aggrandizing or what I call self-puffery, that you're not just saying, oh, I'm amazing, I'm wonderful, people love me, I'm great. This is probably not true, that you're on a path towards becoming more amazing and you're trying to fix things that you maybe aren't as happy with as you'd like to be about yourself. And so this is not about this kind of like vague puffery that I sometimes read about in some of these books. Okay, so here's your step-by-step review of the self-talk tool number 10. First, review your happiness journal. You've been doing this since tool number 9. You should have a lot of data about your self-talk, things that make you happy, things that don't make you happy, negative emotional reactions to things. You should have lots of data to think about. You should identify the ABCs. What are the activating events that cause things? Try to get at what some of these beliefs might be using the 5 whys. And what are the emotional consequences? So again, things don't make you unhappy. It's not just stimulus response. It's not just event, emotional reaction, that it's event, and the reaction is moderated by your beliefs, and you can change these beliefs, but you need to know what they are, or at least if you don't know what they are, what you want them to be. So I might not know what all of my beliefs are that got stuck in there when I was a child, but I can choose what beliefs I want to have and just kind of overwrite those with the positive self-talk. Categorize these by your 3 areas of happiness and try to come up with self-talk statements for each of the 3 areas. Start by doing some divergent brainstorming. You're not going to use all your self-talk statements. Start with kind of a wide variety of them and then refine them, condense them, maybe get rid of some of the ones that aren't as important, or maybe you've got 3 that are similar and you're like, I don't need all 3 of these, I'm going to use just one of them. Eventually you're going to consolidate all this into a short list of well-written self-talk statements. It's going to take you a while to go from kind of a first draft of a self-talk statement to one that really works for you. Try to keep the list short, certainly less than a page. I would say less than 20 is probably a good idea. I think maybe even a dozen might be good to start with, or something like that. Print it out, keep it handy, look at it and read it a couple of times a day, maybe on the bus on the way to school or something like that, or maybe before you get started in the morning, or maybe while you're eating lunch or something like that. But 2-3 times a day, look at the list, and you don't have to say them to yourself. Some people says that it helps. And start testing. Find out, do these self-talk statements work? This isn't necessarily the end of the line. You're not just going to do this once and be done forever. You're working on the things that you're trying to change. Eventually, if you're good at it, you won't need some of these self-talk statements anymore. You can take those off the list because you fixed those things, and you can move on to the next raft of things that you might be trying to work on. So, remember, entrepreneurship's like learning how to play the guitar. It takes practice. Learning how to become happy is like learning how to play the guitar. How much happiness do you want in your life? Do you want an average level of happiness, or do you want your happiness to be at number 11? Do you want to be happy most of the time, or do you want to kind of have a lot of up and downs? I would like to suggest try to be as happy as you can possibly be as long as you can be, within reason given the reality of your context. So don't forget, crank it up to 11.